The Biennale is, every 2 years, a kind of reassertion of the Venetian Empire. That vanished centuries ago, but for the last 100 years almost, every 2 years, here in Venice, there's been this sudden idea that Italian art still leads the world, that Venetian art is at the head of Italian art, and all around you, you see pocket empires, pocket colonial outposts. I'm sitting on the steps of the British Pavilion, largely built out of the ruins of the Campanile in St. Mark's Square, which collapsed in the early 1900s and was conveniently shipped down the Grand Canal, dumped here, so that neoclassicism could rise on its broken bricks. The pavilions are all owned by the countries involved, so it's a kind of League of Nations situation or an embassy situation. Well, I'm a long-time Biennale comer. I've been to 5 now, and every time I come through the gates and I think there's going to be some surprises here. Maybe everything will be ready on time, maybe the Italians will have been slightly self-effacing this time, but no, it's much as usual. There's a great central pavilion filled with works to do with alchemy, it's claimed, which means basically any old post-surrealist hodgepodge that you care to name and is probably represented by an Italian dealer is in that show. It's a complete mess, and it's a meaningless mess. It's a kind of visual rabble. There's a very nice show of curiosity cabinets, 18th and 17th century intellectual collections of objects such as genuine dried mermaids, shells, curious bits of coral, treatises on various things. This is interesting because it links in with a lot of themes of the ways people are painting today, which is a kind of rediscovery of the past. The national pavilions are on the whole pretty dismal. The pavilions that always come off best are the ones with the biggest art markets and most organised art bureaucracies. There's the French pavilion, very chic in Dan Buren stripes, which deck out the building a treat, and you only want to have a kind of late 60s model modelling Courrèges in front of it to feel that you're at home there. There's the German pavilion with Sigmar Polke, very, very loudly hailed in advance as being a really fantastic event. I think it's a major representation of gel and vacuity in art. There's the American pavilion, heavily sponsored, Noguchi's works, paper lanterns, which are, I suppose, top echelon habitat. Beautiful, but really, to say the least, lightweight. Very disappointing, that, I think.
In the ex-imperial grandeur of the British Pavilion, we have the paintings of Frank Auerbach. Aloof from fashion, and fashion is all here in Venice, Auerbach has won the prize for Best Artist at the Biennale, the Golden Lion. He's won it jointly with the German Sigmar Polke, a more Biennale sort of figure. It's appropriate, though, that Auerbach should win this recently revived prize here in Venice, the capital of oil painting. Titian, Giorgione, Bellini, Tiepolo, these are the painters with whom he connects and can be truthfully compared.
The last 2 or 3 times, the British Pavilion's had a unchauvinistically, I can call a very winning streak. Last time, 2 years ago, it was Howard Hodgkin. Now, he pioneered the use of coloured walls. He developed a very fine, pale, sharp, sweet green, which linked his pictures with the walls and made the whole pavilion a wonderful kind of all-round, wrap-around, total Hodgkin. It was, I think, the best way he's ever been presented, his own presentation. The Auerbach is a kind of sequel. He's had the pavilion painted a dark but silvery, sort of pewter grey. The pictures in it are very sparsely hung. You get 3 small pictures on the main wall. He's not gone for any kind of excess. He's not gone for, I'm going to have a go at Tintoretto, like many of his artistic colleagues around the campus have been doing. He simply produced his pictures, small number, choice pictures, and they look quite wonderful.
He's 55, and outside of England he's not very well known because he only paints about a dozen pictures a year, and it's years since he last showed in Europe. But among painters, his name is a byword for concentration. Auerbach paints only 2 subjects, the cityscape and the human figure. He goes at the same model over and over again. A recipe for monotony, you might think, but no. And when the history of late modernism is finally written, it's going to be realized how much is owed to British artists, and especially to the obstinate, visionary characters of a painter like Auerbach.
Frank, a lot of people have talked about you as though you were an expressionist artist. What do you think is the relation of your work to expressionism?
Well, of course, no artist thinks of themselves as being the representative of a movement or a member of, as it were, some party within the history of art. But I admire vehemence and passion as much as anyone, but I don't actually paint my pictures in order to be conveyors of excitement or passion or anger in themselves. I actually find that the most exciting thing in painting, the thing that seems most worth doing, is saving something, a little bit of something, from its inevitable death and destruction. And I admire people who set about that task with an urgency, or find that as they go on with it, that the problem is so difficult that they're forced to make extreme or violent moves in order to achieve it. I'm not particularly attracted to painters who set out to make some sort of image of their own violence as though this was in itself a thing to be admired.
I think most people, when they see your paintings for the first time, and they see how thick the paint is and how vehement the brushstrokes are, get an impression of impetuousness from them and conclude that the picture has been painted very quickly. But this is not the case, and in fact they take a great deal of time to do.
They do take a great deal of time to do, but the impression of impetuousness is an absolutely just one, because I don't, as it were, tinker around with a painting and add one slow mark after another. My method, and it isn't a method that I've chosen as being a better method than another, but it's simply an expression of my temperament and personality, is that I've tried to paint something and I might have covered the canvas within the first half hour, and I would be delighted, and I always hope to paint a picture in half an hour, but I never have. I've put it down and discover weaknesses. Either there's not the faintest resemblance to the subject, or the thing has no coherent architecture, and painting is, after all, an art of architecture, formal art. Or there may be an element of both these things, but what is expressed fussily and bitterly, and one wants to put it as concisely and as economically as possible. I think the whole history of art has been a move towards economy. There's no difference between Velázquez and Manet, except that Manet expressed what he had to say more economically, and Matisse perhaps more economically still. So I try to do these things. I cover the picture in the first half hour. I find it inadequate. I feel myself that I would like everything to hang together as though it had been said in one breath. So I scrape it down, I have another go. I find that doesn't work, I scrape it down, I have another go. It's not as cut and dried as that. Painting is extremely difficult and extremely complicated. I may be tinkering around with one corner for an hour and not scrape anything down, but it is a long business. And the end of a picture very often tends to be that I finally, after a myriad of timid decisions, of inadequate reworkings, found the courage to scrape the whole thing down from top to bottom, rub the whole drawing down from top to bottom, and in a relatively short time, as it were, without self-consciousness, simply to be conscious and not to be conscious of what I'm doing, find that I've perhaps digested the problems and the presence of the model to such an extent that almost without self-conscious thought and without inhibition, I can put it down in one go. it is very testing, because if the slightest corner goes wrong, I can't tinker with the corner. I have to scrape it down and do it again. And it's immensely exciting for somebody as timid as me, who's not prepared to do tightrope walking or even run across the traffic unless the lights have changed. This is my form of excitement.
When you're in the studio, what is it that you have in your sights? What is your quarry?
Firstly, what I really want is to find a marvelous form that I hadn't predicted. I really want to surprise myself. That's very interesting and exciting. Secondly, I'm almost illiterate mathematically, but I don't think here's this person who's sad or happy or has got a small chin or long hair or anything like that, and I want to pin them down. I actually think in terms of geometry. I mean, I find this form and the relationship to the space and the chair behind and so on, and it's a geometrical problem. So I think what is the relation of this plane to that? What's the relation of this area to another? This is like the sort of geometry one learns at school, except that it's immensely complicated by the added factor of expression. And I don't mean expression in the sense of somebody expressing misery or joy, but expression in the sense that one cat from another will have a different expression on his face. Everything has got a very particular look. Rembrandt said that all painting was portraiture. Well, it is portraiture, and it's portraiture when you're painting a building, and it's portraiture when you're painting a tree, and it's portraiture when you're painting a room full of people. There's a very, very subtle balance of factors, and one tries to capture that as one would try to capture an animal in a net, or a butterfly, or some other living thing without destroying it. And at the same time, one wants to make a commanding image that will stand with the greatest clarity on the wall, like a flag. It's fairly easy to make an image that tells across a room. It's not totally impossible to get a sort of sensitive reaction to particular relationships. But to get the two together is very, very difficult to do. And to get the two together in such a way that the person is not actually, is carried beyond the surface of the picture, but is somehow involved and becomes the forces that it depicts, seems to me to be a sort of magic, and I think that's what one's trying for.
Do you make any rigid distinctions between drawing and painting?
I absolutely don't. I feel as though I'm doing the same thing in both cases. I think painting is drawing. I think that when people speak of drawing, and they speak as though it's a question of putting a black line on a white sheet of paper, what they're talking about is something that I don't recognize. Drawing is holding together a form in one's mind and being able to make notations about it. Now, drawing with charcoal or a chalk on a white piece of paper, it seems to me to be an immensely satisfying intellectual activity. I can somehow feel a little bit intelligent when I have chalk in my hand and draw on a white piece of paper. Paint is messy, paint is uncontrollable, paint has all sorts of unfortunate, unforeseen tendencies to slide or to get muddy and so on. It's more complicated. But painting, too, is drawing. I mean that one draws in, as it were, slabs and areas rather than in outlines and notations. And it seems to be that, in a sense, painting in that way is more complete. And conventional wisdom is that you draw first, and you learn to draw, and then you paint afterwards. But I find, in fact, that my drawing has grown out of my painting. And then when I've drawn for a certain amount of time, I fall into habits, and I stop drawing for a certain time, but I never stop painting, because painting is so complicated that I can't fall into habits. But the mode of thought is exactly the same in each case for me.
Do you find that there are only certain models that you have been able to work with over a long period of time?
I sometimes wonder whether only certain models have been able to work with me.
It's pretty taxing, isn't it?
It is taxing. I've sat myself, and there must be occasions when one's impatience becomes so great that it's really by an effort of will that one sits still. But some people seem to be prepared to do it. I certainly get fond of them for doing it. And that fact in themselves makes them interesting and touching to me. And of course, there are certain people who I've been closely involved with, whom I've just had a very strong motive to try to pin down, to try and have a souvenir of a life that is passing and that can't be arrested, and that can be memorialized slightly in a painting.
Have you ever had any impulse to make a drawing without a model in front of you?
I've had an impulse, and as I think everybody has, I used to do it. I now work from a model, and I work from drawings, and it's atrophied, this business of working from memory. I find that if I look at somebody, there are more extraordinary things in what I look at. I mean, really gritty, puzzling, extraordinary relationships which I would never have dreamt of, things that are inconvenient, where something's, where one would be tempted to make something glib that goes with a natural swing of one's hand. The subject contradicts it and pulls one up, so one's forced to think again, one's forced uncomfortably to invent. Whereas I think that if I worked simply out of my head, the corrupted memory would have already been smoothed out, and I would work from something that was less testing, and there wouldn't be that element of the chase and the hunt in it, which is what makes painting so exciting. I mean, apart from everything, I seem to be saying again and again how difficult it is, but I don't want to suggest that this is some terrible, onerous ordeal that we are putting ourselves through. I think, in fact, that the best painters are the ones who are having most fun in the studio. And the most fun that can be had is the most exciting chase. I dare say that people who hunt animals find it more fun to hunt some really cunning and speedy beast than to hunt some tame waddler that can be caught within a few minutes. The model there is a friend who's been posing for me for 30 years. She's become twice a week to pose for me for 30 years. And she sits and I paint, and very often we work on the same pose, and I do several paintings for several years. And then the time does occur, even with me, when I feel that I've exhausted that pose, when I feel that I've said everything that at that time I can say about it. And she was sitting upright, and I thought it would be interesting to paint the same form, the head, horizontal, lying on the bed. So she did this, and what may seem a perfectly straightforward image involved me in a fairly lengthy and complex struggle with the perspectives of the cheekbones and the skull, and the way that this form lying down, and particularly perhaps the way the neck fitted into the head under the chin and the neck fitted into the shoulders. All these things are a very complex, interdependent architecture, which even if I turned 2 inches or less, a quarter of an inch to the right or the left, would change entirely. And if one takes the head and puts it an entirely other angle, it's really an entirely separate landscape. The nearest place to me where there are only curves and only fleeting, slipping, sliding changes of level is a landscape, and the nearest landscape is Primrose Hill. I have to walk 15 minutes to it. Doesn't sound very far, but if one does it every morning, first thing in the morning, it's one's first energy gone, so that seems far enough. I'm not going to go to Hampstead Heath in order to do the drawings. I tend to sit towards the bottom of the hill for precisely that reason, very often get my feet wet in winter when the puddles form. I remember this one because I went to a further corner of Primrose Hill. I remember exactly where I sat. I remember also the fact that I did something that I don't remember having done before, which is drawing the clouds often and again as an integral part of the composition. It isn't that I set out to do a colored painting or a blue or red painting or a brown painting. The color changes just as much as the drawing changes, so that within a few minutes a painting that is, say, blue and gray might change into one that is orange, purple, white, and yellow. And the particular color that it has at the end very often reflects the very specific weather and the very specific season of that day. I don't know why, I don't make a conscious effort, but I'm affected by it. And it's a big picture, and I find a big picture, something done at arm's length, physically extremely testing, and I turn my paintings sideways and upside down in order to see what integral character they have, rather than simply as a sort of view or vista or a photograph likeness of the scene. And to turn a big painting round is pretty bad for one's back, and all the painters I know have bad backs. I've worked and lived in a studio for 32 years, and it never occurred to me to paint it. And I don't know whether you know the story of the Snow Queen, where Kai sets off around the world and has all sorts of adventures, and suddenly it returns and finds that the girl next door was the one for him all the time. I suddenly turned round at the gate one day and saw that the house on the one side and the block of houses on the other, and the passage that leads down to my studio in between, seemed a very, very interesting composition. These two weights counterbalancing each other, a little like Scylla and Charybdis. I don't think in those terms. And I started trying to do a painting of it. And having done one, of course, and having gone outside every day, I found that there were other aspects that I hadn't rendered, that I'd lost, that this painting hadn't treated, so I did another. And in fact, over the past, I suppose, 8 or 9 or 10 years, I must have done 16 paintings or so of that particular scene. Not only have I found something very interesting and trying to pin down something that I'm particularly familiar with, but also it's been very, very handy, firstly, not to have to walk very far in order to do the drawing, secondly, in order to be able to rush out in a second, do another drawing, rush back and use it for the painting. It's as close as I come to actually putting up a canvas outside, which with the size of the canvas, the mass of the paint, the fact that I get myself covered in the stuff from top to bottom and behave fairly intemperately while I'm working, I just couldn't possibly work outside. But this is very close to it.
In architectural terms, they're pretty banal buildings, aren't they?
Well, they may be, but in fact they did have a certain curious higgledy-piggledy juxtaposition and variety, which is actually a character that London has. London is not a planned city. As soon as anybody tries to set one style or one scheme, architectural scheme in motion, they run out of steam and somebody puts something entirely incongruous next to it, and that's the character of London, and I do rather like it. If painting is making order out of chaos, we have to be provided with a great deal of chaos.
Which you get in Camden Town.
You get it in London. You get it in London. I think Venice is the most amazing city, but I think on the whole, well, I'm used to London.